Martial Art History Podcast. Hosted by Antonio Aloya. Presented by Martial Arts of Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow.
Hello and welcome, Antony. Thank you for joining us today to talk about the ninja. What was it like to step into your first Bujinkan class in 1999 in Japan? Did you have any other martial arts experience to compare?
I grew up in a martial arts family. They all did martial arts. My uncle was quite a large champion in karate and he competed in a lot, and there was a lot of sort of martial arts training in the family. We all did bits of everything. It was the early 80s, so there was a lot of martial arts stuff going around, and of course it was the height of Karate Kid. So yes, I'd done quite a lot of martial arts, and I did, when I was younger, a lot of Shotokan. So I did Shotokan karate for a long time, and to be honest, I still think that has really built a strong foundation. So the Bujinkan class was very standard Bujinkan. The instructor was very standard. It wasn't bad, it wasn't good, it was, it was interesting. For me, as a youngster, I must have been, it was 1999, so I must have been 20-something, 21 maybe. To me, I really enjoyed it. It fulfilled a fantasy. I think it does fulfill a fantasy, and the idea of the ninja and all this. However, even then I realised people were too, how can I say, strange with the idea of the ninja. They actually thought they were training as ninjas. They thought they were ninjas. As much as I believed in the Bujinkan then, I did not think I was a ninja or anything like that. But I'd been fascinated with ninja training and Bujinkan since a very early age, so it wasn't anything new. I'd read all the Hatsumi books, I'd read all the Hayes books, or all the ones I could get hold of in the UK, and wasn't really a shock. It was like, okay, yep, I've seen this in the books, let's get on with it.
Around what time did you decide to disregard the 20th century ninja manuals and start looking at historical documents relating to the ninja?
It was between the years 2004 and 2008. By 2008, I'd pretty much given up on the idea of the Bujinkan as being a historical school. Originally, I wanted Hatsumi to do the foreword for the Shoninki, and I left a place for him in my work in the book before we got it published, because I genuinely thought, he was a real master. But by the time I'd finished the Shoninki, by the time we'd done other things, we just knew there was something wrong. So 2008 is the year that I stopped, and that's when I brought out my channel, my YouTube channel, and that's when I started doing my Shinobi Soldiers series to try to tell people, hey, hold on a minute, something's wrong. Now, I knew it was wrong, I knew there was a problem, but I didn't know all the information I know now. But nothing has changed. I still have the same opinion, even after all these years. We came to the correct conclusion, and I wouldn't change that now. We definitely, I think, got it right.
What were the turn of events that resulted in the creation of your research team? How did you come to find your team members?
I had found Yoshie before I gave up on Bujinkan. In fact, Yoshie is part of the reason. She was looking into Bujinkan and she started to say, this looks suspicious and this isn't right. And then I started to look deeper and deeper. So it was a bit of a transition from, Hatsumi, he's shown this and does this compared to the Shoninki, to by the end of it I was like, no, this is not right, this is not real. Even if he does have some real historical things, it's just too much to try to, divide from the truth. It was just too much. So then I met Yoshie. She was one of my she was actually one of the one of the students in my class, and the reason she was a student is because she was actually a receptionist at the English language school, and they had to go, they were forced to go. She didn't need to be there at all. Her English was way too good, but they have to be in the classes to make sure that everything is going correctly. So that's how we started speaking, and that's how I came across Yoshie. Miyako was actually a mother of one of the children in the class, and she was just loved old writing and old things. And of course the monk gets involved because we met him because of the the grave. So we then got a monk involved. We recreated a social group. Now that means cursive writing group and old style writing. And basically what we did is put an old school back together. They'd gone defunct. They basically gone under, and we found the details for the main guy, and he put it back together while we did a scroll. I assume it's probably collapsed again now in Japan, but they all had great knowledge. So at one point we had a lot of people with a lot of knowledge doing the scrolls. But now, of course, Yoshi and Miyako, they're quite good at social, so we don't really need that group anymore. And any questions I have, I've now got qualified Buddhists in the Natori school. I've got a monk to hand. I've got swordsmen. I've got translators. I've got people who speak different languages and Japanese and do swordsmanship. Miyako now has her grades in Yagyu Shinkage Ryu. So we have a lot of people working around this central axis to come together to make sure everything is okay.
What was it like working on a historical team? What benefits have you experienced that might have been difficult if you were researching on your own? Would you suggest other historians to work in related teams to assist their own research?
Yes, I think it's absolutely necessary to have multiple people on a project. The problem this brings is that everybody has their own opinion on something which might not really be based in historical accuracy or historical research. That's one problem. So for example, I'm recently working on the Yagyu Shinkage Ryu, and I've involved about 4 or 5 people Western people with sword qualifications, and they just want to use what's in their school or what they think they know. For example, there's a sword stance called Hasso no Kamai, and it's clearly different in the original scroll to the one that's taught, standardized today, and they want to do the standardized version. But I keep having to remind them that standardization came because everybody had different things, and we can't use standardized versions for single lineage scrolls. So we start to get problems like that. But on the whole, there is no way I could do what I do without my Japanese translators. Not a chance. I could do a lesser version of it, and some of my books that I write on my own are done from my own research in libraries and translated materials, but I could not do what I have done, which is bringing out the scrolls to the modern audience, because we need those translators, and you can't just have any old translator. You've got to have somebody who really knows. So yes, I think everybody should work in a team and have various people from various places, but you need someone to be a decision maker. The problem is nobody agrees on anything. Everybody tries to try and put their own ideas in, which may not be the best, because not everybody's been to university, not everybody understands how history works and how you get to the correct analysis of historical data. But you do need people's expertise. So somebody might be great at how to read old kanji, someone might be great with old vocabulary, someone might have a great knowledge of swordsmanship, but inside of that comes their own problems of what they try to put into the text, and you're like, no, that should not go in the text. So it needs someone with a clear head in the middle to say, no, stop there.
How and when did you find out that you had a knack for researching and writing? What keeps you motivated to continue to do both?
I would say I don't have a great talent for writing. In fact, one of my favourite stories to tell is I spoke to my publisher and said, I'm not the best writer. And they said, don't worry about that. What you need is a good idea. You don't need to be a good writer. There are plenty of good writers, and they tend to become editors. And actually, writers don't tend to be very good. They just have really good ideas. So, of course, me putting the team together, collecting all the scrolls, doing all of the research was the good idea. And I tend to have a knack for seeing through things. So instead of looking at, say, a sword school and thinking, oh, that's correct, I think, that doesn't really look right, that doesn't work, that doesn't fit into the broader picture. Now, this started really after I'd been to university. I went to university and did my degree in ancient history and archaeology, and I did my master's degree in theoretical archaeology. And the idea is you have to look for patterns in things, you have to look at the larger picture, you have to look at how things don't really make sense straight away, and you look for the deeper story. And I applied that to world of the ninja, to the world of the samurai, the swordsmanship, and I realised actually a lot of it doesn't make sense. And by that I mean that's not how a samurai would really fight. You look at some of the sword schools today and you think, oh, no, that really wouldn't do anything. And you look at, a lot of people question Aikido, a lot of people question, some of the softer martial arts, and they do have their ancestry in the harder samurai styles, but why are they doing that certain sort of style now? It doesn't really make sense. So I wouldn't say I had a knack for writing, but I definitely put a lot of my I definitely put the credit on the shoulders of university, because yes, I had the brain power, yes, I had the question in mind, but university really made me understand how to look at these things.
Do you feel your research and writings have altered or added to the historical knowledge of the ninja in such a way that other historians and enthusiasts would find the information a valuable starting point for their study?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I would go as far to say as I would ignore everybody's research before my team. Now, that does sound a little bit narcissistic. However, that's the entire point of my research team. It simply was that the research was not good enough. So I just used the single rule of throw everything away and start again. So if you're reading basically something by someone else from before we started, it's not worth the trouble. I went through it, I did it all, you don't need to. It was so full of incorrect information, of stereotypes, of tropes, that it has no value whatsoever. So you can nitpick it if you know what you're looking for, but you really have to know what you're looking for and not to fall into the traps. So if you just start with our research, you don't fall into any traps, and we get rid of all of that for you.
How much impact do you feel the ninja actually had on Japanese culture and martial arts as a whole compared to their samurai counterparts?
I think the ninja actually had a smaller impact than we believe. They are not really well recorded in the historical record. They are only a small part. The ninja themselves say they're amazing and that, you cannot do without them. And yes, you can't do without spies. We need spies. The Japanese samurai needed spies. So I think that the samurai were far more influential because, of course, they were the main staple of samurai culture. And I think ninja are far more famous today than they were in the past. But of course, they were an intrinsic part of samurai life. They were an important part of samurai life. But I don't think they were as important as the past as people would like to believe.
What have you seen as the biggest misconception people have regarding the ninja and their existence in Japanese history and lore?
I think the biggest misconception people have regarding the ninja is the fact that they think the ninja are separate to the samurai. That's just not simply the case. Yes, there are parts of Japan where the people are more famous for their ninja skills. Absolutely true. So we would have more ninja-centric areas. But without doubt, people have this idea that the ninja are separate, and to this day I see people from Japan saying this. I see high-end people saying this, big YouTubers saying this. It's just not true. It's just not true that the ninja are different to other samurai. We have only 3 pieces of art that come from the ninja themselves, drawing ninja, and they look exactly like all of the samurai. There is just simply no difference.
Where do you think this misconception began, and why do you feel it has been propagated and still propagated in today's age?
So, the ninja, how did we feel they were separate or against each other from the samurai? Now, you cannot find anything to do with ninja v samurai before the 20th century. But I do think the origin of this starts with a misconception of how samurai clans work and what ninja are and what are ninja clans. Those terms can be very, very destructive in English. They're very bad. So one of the first things is the Iranki, which was written in the 1600s, and it was a tale about the wars in Iga, which were from around the 1580s. So this is like
70 years later it's been written, and the author who was writing it was observing the people of Iga, and he said, oh, they do their ninjutsu in the morning and they do their farming in the afternoon. Because remember, or maybe you don't know, that actually the people of Iga were taken away from their lands. They were thrown off their lands, or at least the ownership of their lands was taken away, and in fact they actually had to work on their ancestral lands, but for someone else. They were a defeated people. The so-called ninja clans of Iga are a defeated set of families. So what we find is that all the way back to the 1600s, they were declining into farming. And then what happens is we get this idea that they're no longer full warriors, and they're half warriors, half farmers. And then during the 20th century, people pick up on this and say, oh, you know, they farm in the evenings and they do their ninjutsu in the mornings, and they're out in this sort of area which is detached from people. It's inside a ring of mountains. Now, it is technically inside a ring of mountains, but the term mountain is very, very ambiguous in English. A mountain can be, anything from a large hill to Everest. And I'm going to be honest with you, the mountains, inverted commas, are not so big in Iga. And there's actually a main road that goes through Iga, through to to Kyoto, and they had trade going through Iga. It was a very open place, but it was also very easy to defend because of the hilly terrain. You would say it was more hilly terrain versus mountains. So you can see the difference. When I visited Iga and Koka today, you can clearly see the difference. So it's a bit of a mixture of the ninja losing their position, their samurai status, or when that is misleading. It's the samurai families of Iga losing their status, being taken over by other families, and then being famous for ninjutsu, but losing the amount of money they needed to practice ninjutsu, and therefore the decline of ninjutsu and the decline of wealth. And when you mix all this in and put it into the 20th century, you end up with poor people who are cut off from the rest of Japanese society, who are practicing espionage arts, which is technically true to a certain level, but the reality is these are ex-samurai, they've run out of money, their land has been taken away from them, they only just barely hold on to the idea that they used to be very popular shinobi who were hired all over Japan, and actually the place they live in is defendable, but it's also very accessible via the roads and main highways in and out of it. So that's where we get the problem with those.
Almost throughout your career, controversy has followed you, specifically when dealing with the ninja and their respective historical documents, even now with your research into historical Japanese fencing. How do you usually respond to such people looking to defame you?
Yes, we've had a lot of people come against our team, against everything, and to be honest, I divide them into two types of people. Those with real questions. I mean, generally polite people who've got a question saying, hold on, this doesn't make sense, or I don't understand this. Normally the answer is that they haven't thought about it in full, and then when they do think about it, they're like, oh, okay, I see what you mean. But the majority of the people really just want to believe in their school, usually Bujinkan. So the other type is actually those who are just rude and out for aggression, and we don't deal with those. I simply have the line that if somebody is aggressive or rude or just emotional, then we don't deal with them, because there's no point. When you're dealing with history, you have to deal as a dispassionate observer. This is where you're not emotionally involved in it. So what I find with the sword schools is that every single person who has a problem with what we do with the swords research is the fact that it's not the same as their school. And if it's not the same as their school, they hate it. And especially if we're doing a different branch to their school, they hate it. And then when it comes to ninja, if they have been trained in ninja martial arts, ninja hand-to-hand combat, they hate what we do because it doesn't fit with what they do. So this is the problem. If what I say is right, is correct, then what they are claiming has to be wrong. That's specifically true with the ninja. With the Japanese swordsmanship, to me it's strange because obviously Japanese swordsmen have different approaches and try different things, and they just don't seem to understand that there are different ways to do certain things. Even though they look similar and they follow the same line, they really struggle with the idea that there are slight variations in the world, and they just can't seem to get past that point.
In 2016, you published a book entitled The Lost Samurai School, essentially reviving a long-lost Ryu. After a beginning many would consider to be lucky, what was the deciding factor for you and your team to ultimately piece together this manual?
Okay, there is an issue here with your question. We did not revive a long-dead Ryu. That was Natori Ryu. This is Lost Samurai School is based on Mubyoshi Ryu, and the jiu-jitsu of this school is still alive. It's been alive for 400 years, and it's only known by about 2 or 3 people. And even then it has been altered to fit a more karate-centric base. So here the school is not long dead. In fact, it was thriving in the 1800s and early 1900s, but it has declined so much that it's almost dead. What we did do is piece together as much of the school as we could, so that people could see what a school actually looked like in the past. And the reason we did Mubyoshi is just because, as you say, it seemed lucky. Just too many things came together from fate, if you like, where we found scrolls, we found teachers, we found information, and it just was too good to pass up, so we put this school back together. So what we have done is not revive a long dead school in Mubyoshi Ryu, but put it back together from its base components and give it back to the headmaster, who didn't have these facts, he didn't have these scrolls, he didn't know about them. As far as he was concerned, he only went back to the 1800s, but we've told him now he goes back to the 1600s and is one of the biggest schools in Kanazawa. So actually, and he's still there, if I remember rightly, in the same area. So that school, that seems to be the main line, or at least the only line left, and which would then make it the main line. And hopefully that school will go on further and further. I want more and more people to get involved with that school, because it would be better if more and more people trained in it to keep it alive.
Additionally, you have resurrected Natori Ryu, which has its own following, organizational structure, and study groups. What led you to find and ultimately re-establish Natori Ryu today? How has the greater martial arts world received the modern incarnation of Natori Ryu?
So, actually, Natori is a fully brought back from the dead school. It was totally dead. We don't know that when the last dojo closed down. All we have is the scrolls, and we resurrected it. Now, the reason for resurrecting this school was simply the fact that it was a full gungaku school, which means military skills. It is not a martial arts school. It does have some elements of martial arts in it and hand-to-hand combat, but mainly it is about samurai tactics, and that is really missing in the martial arts community. There is nothing on samurai tactics. You try to find any book on what actually happened. How did an army cross a river? How did they move? What formation did they take? How did they get water? How did they move their baggage trains? All of these types of questions. There's just no answer for them. Natori Ryu has the answer for all of that. And that's why I got into that. And of course, Natori Ryu seemed to be the best option because we came from the Shoninki. I named my website Natori Ryu. Everything was aiming towards Natori Ryu. And now, of course, we have a great set of books, a great system, and hopefully people enjoying it around the world. What I have found, though, is that people tend to not like it. If you go back to the original scrolls, one of the unpublished scrolls says that actually, even in the 1700s, people were not so interested. By people, I mean samurai. Samurai were not so interested in gungaku and military studies because they just wanted to do fighting and cool things and a bit of magic. But actually, the lectures on military tactics were not well received, or nobody really cared. So, and it's been the same today. Nobody really cares about the old ways of samurai. They just want to look good with a sword, or again argue about which way to look good with a sword. Very few people actually navigate the old ways of the samurai.
Other than reviving the 2 aforementioned Ryu, what else do you hope to accomplish? How did having a Bujinkan background rather than a Koryu affect your interpretation of the historical scrolls that made up the manual?
Okay, so with Natori Ryu, I want to bring about samurai background, samurai strategy, samurai tactics, and everything people need to know beyond swordsmanship. So that's what I'd like to do there. I would like to bring back people to the realistic side of fighting. I know HEMA has its problems, but actually I think it's getting closer to real fighting than anyone else in the world, because they're actually, doing the research and the practical effort as well. So I do think that really, really helps. So I would like people to have a really good grounding in what used to happen in samurai swordsmanship, and also have a good physical understanding of interpreting the scrolls, what does work, what doesn't work. And I don't mean which of the scrolls doesn't work, what I mean is, we read things and think, we stand up straight and hit the sword down. It's like, no, you need to do a bit more than that, inside of movement. So the one good thing about the Bujinkan is the Bujinkan actually stayed away from static movement. And one thing I like to praise Hatsumi for is the fact that he actually got rid of the static movement. I think if Hatsumi would have continued down the path he started on, meaning like honest martial arts and honest idea of how to fight, in reality he'd have got a lot more respect now in his later age. But he just went silly, went with like too many strange things, like multiple attackers going down for no reason, and it just ended up a bit strange. So I think, if anything, I've captured the old Bujinkan essence, and if you apply that to the scrolls, you get a far more dynamic and more realistic understanding than just step 1, step 2, step 3, which I just think was well, let me explain that. I think that Koryu does hold the essence to swordsmanship, but I think it's how they used to teach children after the war. Or I think a lot of things changed from in the 20th century when we started to get big business dojos. Now, actually, dojo culture started in the 1600s, so I think it goes more and more systematic, but until you get to the 20th century where you think, they're just teaching lots of people, in the early 20th century, pre-war, remember, there's lots of soldiers, how to teach soldiers martial arts, how to teach lots of people martial arts, nationalistic, samurai fervor, they love it. But after the war, it then becomes very much a peace zen way. So if you mix up the popularity of swordsmanship before the war and the love for samurai with the post-war sort of look for peace, because nobody wanted to go back to the warring days, then I think there's too many problems in Koryu. Whereas if you come from a more movement-based background and dynamic background, you can cut through those issues that actually happened in Japanese culture.
One of your more recent endeavors is to find out how exactly the samurai fought during the Sengoku period. What factors led you to this line of questioning, and what steps have you taken and plan to take in order to answer that question?
So yes, what I want to do is I want to realise or understand or bring about a correct understanding of how samurai fought in the Sengoku period. The reason I've picked the Sengoku period is because, of course, it was the warring period, but it's probably not the most, how can I say this? It's probably not the best to look at swordsmanship. My eyes were opened when the head of Taisha Ryu said probably the best swordsmanship was in the end of samurai times, when they were fighting street to street, hand to hand in Kyoto. And it wasn't, big epic battles, it was people fighting between the streets with swords. But of course that mixes us up with all of the problems of the evolution of swordsmanship in the Edo period. So if you got the evolution of swordsmanship in the Edo period and try to pick out the great bits in the Kyoto street fights, it's too difficult. So let's just go back to before the Edo period, when we know that swordsmanship started to get a little bit flowery, started to get more ritualistic and less realistic. So let's go back there. But that creates an even bigger problem. Well, a different problem. It means we have almost no information. Most people don't know this, but all the information we have on swordsmanship comes from a handful of schools, and most of them come after the Edo period. And even if they do predate the Edo period, they've probably changed a lot. So actual Sengoku period swordsmanship is difficult to pinpoint. So we have two options. The swordsmanship from the end of samurai times, 1868, where people are hand-to-hand fighting in the streets, or you've got the pre-Edo period where people are fighting, before the Edo period, and period of peace made swordsmanship a bit redundant. So you have two problems there, and both of them are equally difficult to surmount. However, we know in the Sengoku period people were at war. There was no reason for swordsmanship to, become a bit static, unrealistic. It needed to work back then. But we do know that as the gun came in, actually swordsmanship did start to go static and did start to become unrealistic. So you can sort of pinpoint the use of the gun with the decline of the sword, which of course the use of the gun brought about peace in Japan, and then the decline of the sword really started to happen in that period. So this is the problem we have, and my job is to get through all of that and try to find what the samurai actually fought like. And I think it'll be a lifelong project, but bit by bit everybody will start to understand it.
What obstacles do you feel will be in your way as you continue down this line of research?
I believe that the main obstacle, to be fair, is people's emotional attachment to their sword schools. The simple fact is you have to let go. There is no way that the sword schools out in Japan today are teaching fight realistic swordsmanship that would work in a real duel. It just wouldn't work. I'm not saying it's not the right swordsmanship, I'm not saying it's not the right moves, I'm just saying it's taught in the wrong way, and it is not relaxed enough, it's not flowing enough, it's not dynamic enough. So I think if everybody sort of just let go of that idea that they only have one way to do it, or that their way is the best, just relax and start to investigate and start to free up their bodies and free up their movement, I think we'd find a lot more people would benefit. And it would be great if people out there came to me and said, Anthony, I've got this idea about this, or I'm gonna try to go back in the research and dig out some information for you in this scroll. That would really help me. That would really help. So if that happened, it would be great. What I would like is for all the swordsman Koryu practitioners in the world to do two things. Is one, start learning Natori Ryu, because it's the only school out there that has a full gungaku school, full military tactics school, and it doesn't cross over with samurai sword schools. We absolutely know that samurai used to practice multiple schools. This idea that you only train in one school is not right, it's ridiculous. You only train in one sword school, or you only train in one spear school or one archery school. You don't do two sword schools. But you can do a sword school, you can do an archery school, you can do a gungaku school, you can do all that. There is no problem whatsoever. So I hope out there, or anybody reading this, will think, right, I'm going to go follow Anthony's YouTube channel, I'm going to look at the swordsmanship he's doing and try to bring that into what actually, or what would have actually happened in the past. How would samurai really fight? If somebody out there is graded in Koryu, they can say, okay, would this really work? The skill might be correct, but would they do it like this? Or does this feel like it's how you would teach a child how to do it, or how to teach a room full of people, step by step? So let's get rid of the individual steps and make it fluid motion between the fights.
Thank you for this insightful conversation into your research. Best of luck with it.
Okay, thank you.
Read the entire interview and much more at martialarthistory.com. Check out Aikido Comes to America, a brief history of the art's American pioneers and their journey to the present, available on Tambuli Media.